Hi, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Advanced Access Controls Made Easier presentation. We're hoping in the next 20 minutes or so to give you a very high-level view of a couple different ways to look at how access could be made simpler in your environment. My name is Bob Powell. I am one of the principal solution architects here at PDS. My area of responsibility covers business data and data protection, which really is about all the things that touch data in the environment, whether it's the servers, whether it's the back-end storage, how the end users access that data, really all things that might be associated with it. I've been with the PDS family now going on, I guess, 8 years. I joined in 2012 when the organization was still known as Works Computing. I'm a double E out of Madison. I grew up in Madison and went to the University of Wisconsin before I relocated up to the Twin Cities, and I've had a wonderful career in the Twin Cities. I transitioned into the data center out of engineering work when commercial Unix and open systems started to enter the market. So think HPE Lex, Solaris, those kinds of things. And for those of you that are in the Linux world, this predates Linux, so this is all pre-Linux stuff. I don't really want to date myself, but it's been fun. The data center is an enjoyable place to be, and data access and control and all that is pretty cool. So the agenda for today, we're going to first take a look at a couple of common remote worker access methods. And these are methods that are commonly employed as a result of a lot of people needing to start working from home. And there's some challenges associated with that, and we'll hopefully try to talk through some of the ways that maybe you can make this a little more streamlined and make it work a little bit better. We'll talk about why granular access control can become a good thing to have and why it's important and where it fits in. And then a couple examples from two different perspectives. One more from a network administration perspective or network access, and then another more from an application access perspective and an end user application perspective. And then, just a quick note, this is kind of the paradox of recorded presentations. So right now, I'm the Bob of the present will be kind of in the background in a chat mode. And so Bob of the past, who's delivering the presentation right now, was actually Bob of the present for me, but I'm delivering it to you who are the participants of the future. So yeah, it's kind of this paradox that we work with. But at any rate, good morning and welcome to PDS Connect. And feel free to interact with my live self if you have any questions going on in the background. So on to more of the presentation. So common office architectures, and this is just a real generalization of the way offices are deployed. But typically, on the internal LAN, we've got users with desktops. We've got some users with laptops. They may use Wi-Fi. We've got some data, whether that's servers, whether there's a full data center in your corporate environment. But a lot of things behind this internet firewall. And that firewall is sort of the protective measure to keep nefarious things out and, trying to keep, your network safe and healthy. So when we, when we enter into this situation of how do we access data, there become a few things that we have to think about. And part of it is, where does this data live? And what kind of data is it? And who should have access to it? And so, when we're sitting behind the firewall, some of those things are pretty easily defined by the network team. But as we start making, like VPN connections and things like that, it can become more of a challenge. So, and one of the more common, we'll go through a couple of common access methods, but a really common one today is for people that had those laptops to be going home and using Wi-Fi, whether that's their home Wi-Fi or other sources of Wi-Fi, and they are essentially creating a VPN connection back to this internet firewall, and that protects their data, becomes the cone of silence, if you will, that allows that laptop to communicate securely back to the on-premises corporate network and access the things that that laptop user would normally access on an everyday basis. So this is pretty simplistic, but tends to work. And a lot of folks have deployed this and started to bring their remote user community on just using, VPN kind of connections. There's another class of user that is this desktop user. And so to help with connectivity for some of those kinds of users, there's been, in some cases, a real fast approach, which could be to use something like remote desktop protocol to make connections back to the desktop that's sitting in your physical office. And so in order to facilitate that, what we end up with is VPN connections from each of those end user locations, wherever, if they're at home using a home PC, still going to need a VPN connection before that remote desktop protocol would work. That's the most common way of doing it. But what it allows them to do is make that connection back to their desktop and enable those tasks. You can see the little icons that I've created are really, you can see your desktop and you can sort of interact with it with the keyboard and mouse at home, but you're not really physically there. All that stuff is remote. So it's kind of one of these remote access or remote control kinds of things. And that's why I chose that illustration with the lab worker reaching through and kind of remote controlling things, because that's essentially what RDP is doing. The applications don't live back at that home user's desktop. They live back at the office desktop. So, one of the things that's a challenge when you do this is if you have lots of users that now need to access desktops and you're managing a bunch of physical desktops back in the office, that's kind of hard to manage, kind of hard to scale. And so what a lot of folks have done is implement something that is a virtual desktop environment. And that virtual desktop environment essentially takes that physical thing and turns it into software and then runs it in the data center. And then people can still connect to those virtual desktops using, that protocol we described, remote desktop protocol, or other things like that. There are things that work a little bit better. Blast is one from VMware. But what that does is it creates a more scale-out approach to delivering a good desktop experience. Sometimes as you introduce scale, you introduce some other things, and maybe you create a bottleneck, or you find that your firewall capabilities in and of themselves really aren't appropriate for managing all the different types of connections and all the different types of users that are associated with these remote connections. So the first kind of access control that can help address these kinds of situations is what we commonly refer to as network access control, or maybe a secure network access architecture. I'll use that term loosely. There are probably people that have a definition that's very strict and rigid, so I'm going to use it, kind of loosely in this scenario. But what we need to do is create some sort of network access control in the middle of this that can aggregate sources of information for identity purposes that help to determine what the rights are that this user might have. And so those identity things could happen from multi-factor authentication, could happen from Active Directory, could happen from a variety of sources, but something needs to aggregate and put all those things together and determine what rights that connection or that user should have to access different things around the network. So what we do in this case is the firewall doesn't necessarily need to go away. Firewalls are good things. And what we introduce in the middle is something called a network access control enabler. And in this case, we're talking about Aruba ClearPass. So Aruba ClearPass has the ability to essentially aggregate all these other kinds of identity providers. Talked about Active Directory, multi-factor, all those kinds of things, and make decisions about what rights that user should have, or that connection should have, more importantly, when it is attached to the network. And so it's really, in this case, it's really kind of a very powerful decision tree that Aruba ClearPass is able to do, or able to fulfill. And so based on a variety of inputs, and these are all end user, or I should say, configurable, not by the end user, but they're all definable within the policy definitions that you may choose to make for your corporation. But it's a combination of things that might produce different outcomes. So if you have an Active Directory account and a multi-factor authentication works and your device has a certificate, then maybe you're classified as an employee with certain access rights. Different groups within AD can be brought in so that they could distinguish between finance and HR, put you on the right VLAN, all those kinds of things. So a lot of decisions can be made, and it's really up to the configurator as to what things you wish to make decisions about. So where does this fit into the overall architecture? Well, if we look at a traditional environment where we've got corporate devices that might just use a VPN client, this VPN client would make its traditional connection back to the firewall so that it has a secure connection, but there's another step of authentication that needs to occur through the ClearPass engine. And it's the ClearPass engine that then determines what that connection rights are as it enters the the corporate network domain. Think of it as a per connection set of firewall rules that determine exactly what that connection has rights to on the corporate intranet based on what the ClearPass rule determines. So this is one way where we have just a device that can kind of go from anywhere: hotel, airport, coffee shop, etc. When we talk about something that's a little bit more sophisticated, we can use something that we could put, for instance, at a home office, we could put a managed AP or a remote AP, which essentially looks like any other access point you might have, in the corporate environment, but it extends the network out to that home office environment. And so in that kind of scenario, it's the managed AP that actually makes the secure cone of silence, tunnel back to the corporate network environment. And in this case would marry up with some remote access controllers so that they're all talking the same language and they understand how this works. This is all administered, and managed with roles through the ClearPass, policy management engine, all these kinds of things. So very well built, very well architected. The interesting thing is now what it does is it presents essentially at your home office. It presents a real office environment where you can plug in your IP phone, you can plug in your printer, and you can have Wi-Fi access, all in a way that is the same function as you would have if you are sitting in the real office. So the thing about ClearPass, it's not just one particular product or technology. It's really a family. And that family is important because, there's certain things that, might be important up front, certain things you may not need, certain things that you may want to grow into. And so the family really starts with the policy manager, which is this foundational role-based access control, which determines based on all the identity, sources, what rights a connection should have. A couple of companion things when we're dealing with end user devices: on board and on guard. On board is the ability to take an end user device and associate certificates with it. And Aruba ClearPass can be that certificate manager, so you don't have to stand up a separate one. So that's very convenient. On guard is a profiling tool that when a connection is first established, that device is profiled to see if it meets all the security features. Does it have the right versions of software on it, everything updated correctly. If not, then it can be put into a captive portal for some remediation. So that's on guard. And then a couple other things that are really more about the physical network than the the users and their connections. The universal profiler, or the network device profiler, really addresses things in the IoT realm. And in the IoT world, people can connect things to the physical network, switch ports or jacks in the wall, and maybe you need to know what those devices really are. And so Device profiling is the concept of being able to identify a device based on attributes that can be deterministic through its connection properties, whether that's through DHCP or some other kinds of ways that things can be determined. Once they're determined, then you can take action as to what kind of connection might be facilitated. Dynamic segmentation is one of those kinds of things. So at a switch port level or that wall in the jack level, based on what gets plugged into that jack and what device is profiled, that port or that jack can be set up to accommodate that device, maybe on a specific VLAN or maybe on you know, a specific, maybe it's denied just because it's a device that is a rogue AP and that shouldn't be attached. So very cool in the ways that that can happen. So those topics can all be explored in more detail individually, you know, through much deeper dives. So the other type of access control I wanted to bring up is something that's really more from an application perspective. And if your organization is really well organized and is in the process or does a good job of delivering specific applications to specific end users based on their roles, then a secure application access architecture might be the route to take. VMware, normally known for virtualizing server workloads, really does a lot more than that. VMware Workspace ONE is an application access architecture that provides a very interesting approach. The idea is it's really through a portal, a secure application that links you back into your corporate assets. And those corporate assets can live in the cloud, they can live in your data center, doesn't really matter. But those applications and what you are allowed to access are determined by your credentials as built with the device and the secure app. And the net result of that is a portal that presents only those applications that you are authorized to use or those files or locations. And it is really a pretty interesting solution because very easy to onboard new employees, give them just access to the applications they need. And it's all done with a single sign-on component. So it's for more mature application or organizations in terms of application delivery, but really excellent tool. In fact, one of my colleagues is talking about this in much more detail right after this at 10:25, I believe. So look for that one. So the Workspace ONE family, as you can imagine, there's a lot going behind the scenes. There's access, which is an identity manager function, similar to the way that ClearPass does the aggregation and such of the all the different identity providers that are out there. There's a very powerful unified endpoint management tool for all of those endpoint devices, whether they're laptops, tablets, you know, phones. The ability to onboard all those kinds of devices and manage them in a secure fashion and get only those apps that should be delivered to them is a very interesting component of Workspace ONE. And that's was an acquisition of AirWatch. Other components that are built into this, we talked about the Workspace ONE portal, and that's where the applications are really delivered to the end user. And then Horizon and Horizon Cloud. These are application and virtual desktop delivery environments. So think of VDI or virtual apps. This is the infrastructure that is really there to support the deployment of those apps and the delivery of those out to the end users. So again, the Workspace ONE, you know, it's really about application delivery and it's application focused. There's a large emphasis on the application, you know, delivery team, their ability to, you know, package or deliver these applications. And so very, very important aspect of that. So the time has been going pretty quick here. You know, just quick summary. You know, we looked at a couple of ways that remote workers are now, you know, being enabled to access corporate data assets. We've talked about the need for granular access control because we've got so many different roles and different kinds of work titles that need to get acclimated back onto the corporate network. And then we've talked about a couple of examples with ClearPass and VMware. Again, VMware is going to have a more in-depth session from one of my colleagues at Tech Data right after this, if you're interested. Otherwise, thank you very much for joining the presentation this morning. I should be here in my present self for answering any quick chat questions. And so from my perspective, it's back to my future self. So hopefully this hasn't been too confusing, but thanks for joining us here at PDS Connect. And it's been fun working with you virtually. Take care.